All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for registering and attending the first in our spring series of webinars that we'll be hosting. We'll have one here in February, we'll have one in March, April, and May. So as a result of registering for this, you'll also be on the mailing list to get invited early to the next in our series, which will be the end of March. More details on that coming soon. Some quick housekeeping. Today we will be discussing virtual machine backups as an approach towards backing up your SQL environment. We'll talk about how that approach may impact your RTOs and RPOs, your recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives. And we'll talk through some questions that you should ask of not only senior leadership and business stakeholders, but your users and other technology professionals to see if this is a good approach for your organization. As we get started, if you look on we are going with a Teams webinar approach. And so if you have questions along the way, I would encourage you to pop them into the Q&A on your Teams app. You should see a Q&A symbol, looks a lot like the chat symbol. If you pop them in there, Chelsea has joined us today and she will read the questions, and I will respond to the best of my ability. This webinar is being recorded, and afterwards we will send you a link out so that you can download it and review it again if you'd like. We can also make the slide deck available because towards the end I will share some additional resources, some links to some blog posts or Microsoft materials that may be helpful as you make a decision. So we'll make that available to you as well. So as we get started, I'll share just a little bit about myself and who we are before jumping into the discussion. I'm Joe Webb. I'm managing partner of the Cero Group. We've been around for over 25 years, focusing primarily on the Microsoft SQL Server space. You can see a little bit about my background. I'm not going to go too much into that. I will say, though, that for many, many years, I was very, very active in the SQL Server community. And as a result of that, the speaking engagements and being a part of the Professional Association for SQL Server on the board of directors for that, did receive the Microsoft SQL Server MVP award 8 times. That's short for Most Valuable Professional. About 300 people at the time received that award around the world. And it was really for sharing, as Microsoft put it, your expertise with the community. What it really meant is you shared a lot of expertise for things that you didn't really get paid for, right? So writing books, writing blog posts, participating in community forums online, and speaking at events. So it was a very nice recognition for the things that I enjoy doing. I'm going to go ahead so that we can make it a little more interactive. I am going to share my screen. Or I'm sorry. There we go. So that you'll be able to put a face with a voice. So here at the Cero Group, we have a very narrow niche. We work explicitly with Microsoft SQL servers, and we provide companies that have incredibly important information in their SQL Server environment, but don't cannot just justify a full-time database administration team to help keep those SQL servers reliable, to help keep them secure and healthy and responsive. So we provide those services to our clients, all without having to hire a team of DBA professionals to help with that. Some of the ways we do that is a SQL Server health check that we perform to ensure that each SQL Server is configured to provide a good foundation for the applications that depend on those SQL Server databases. We also do some consulting services, migrations, upgrades, things like that, performance tuning, and what I just mentioned before was our DBA team as a service. We call it SeroShield, where we provide daily health checks, with real-time alerting and monitoring, and help desk support to proactively keep your SQL servers healthy, secure, and reliable. So today, what would you like to have to get out of this session today? Often when I'm presenting this sort of webinar live, I wait for some interactivity from the attendees. Today, since we're in a webinar environment, that makes it a little more difficult. So a lot of what I frequently hear when I present this this material is, first off, we want to discuss why we are backing up in general, right? What is the purpose of a backup? We will make sure that we are all on the same page of why, some of the purposes of it, and also we'll define what RTOs and RPOs are and how those can vary based on the application and the usage that your users may have and the expectations for the reliability of those applications. Then we'll look at 8 questions to ask if your organization is considering or already using virtual machine snapshots as an approach to backing up your SQL servers. It may be a fine approach for your organization. It may be something that you need to revisit and rethink about whether or not that's meeting your needs. It will give you eight questions to ask and answer to determine whether or not it's a good approach for you. Towards the end, we'll share some best practices or some things that we recommend to our clients who are considering or are actively using VMware snapshots as an approach to backing up. And then I'll round out the conversation with some frequently asked questions and some additional resources that may be helpful for you. So when you think of backups, why are we backing up our SQL servers? After all, SQL Server is very reliable. It's very robust. Hardware has gotten a whole lot better. We're no longer on, slow 7200 RPM hard disks. Things are better, faster, more reliable. We have SANs that are redundant. Why do we need to back up is a fundamental question that a lot of organizations do really wrestle with. And so there are a lot of scenarios where backups are still incredibly useful and important for an organization. Certainly disaster recovery is a big one. Yes, as robust as our hardware is these days, it can still fail. You can have hardware failures, you can have natural disasters, tornadoes can hit, floods can hit and destroy entire systems, right? Not to mention the things like ransomware and other intentional disasters that are created. So just being able to recover is a good thing. But then there's the inadvertent disasters, things like, a user accidentally drops one or more rows of, or deletes one or more rows of data or drops an entire table. Anyone who's used SQL Server long enough has accidentally issued a delete statement without a where clause on it. And that is, I could tell you from experience, I did it a long, long time ago, and I learned you never like that feeling, and you work really hard to avoid that feeling again. But having a good backup is helpful in recovering from that. Prior to upgrades, good idea to back up. Recover from data corruption. A database may get corrupted as it's being written to the disk, and being able to recover from that is going to be helpful. There are also other issues, other concerns that where backups become helpful. Data retention and archiving policies, offloading reports to a different SQL server could be done using backups and restores. Refreshing lower level systems such as your QA system, your test system, your development system, all those lower level systems, backup and restores is a good way to do that. And then, of course, security and compliance requirements. You may be depending on your service level agreements with some of your customers, and you may have to have some backups and put in escrow or things like that. So a wide range of reasons why backing up is still a good thing to do in your SQL Server world. Now, just because we back up doesn't mean we can actually recover in a way that is meaningful to us. Backing up is phenomenal. You need to back up, as we just described, but it's the process of being able to restore to a point in time that is helpful to you, and then the amount of time that is helpful to you. So essentially, being able to restore is the part that we really are interested in. And so when we say we can restore, there's two questions that come to mind. One is, how much data can you lose if something disastrous happens? Can you afford as an organization to lose 10 minutes worth of data, an hour, 4 hours, 8 hours, 24 hours a week? How much data can be lost before life gets really, really painful for you? That's called your recovery point objective. Now, your recovery time objective is similar. Again, it is measured in minutes, just like your recovery point objective is. How much time do you have to recover if something disastrous happens? So how long can you be down before life gets very painful for you, before you start violating your SLAs with your clients, before you your senior executives do not have the information they need in order to make the decisions that will propel the business forward? Those answers are going to vary widely. A nightly refresh, a data warehouse that gets refreshed nightly will have a very different use case than, say, a doctor's office that is seeing patients throughout the day. If their system is down, a lot of people are very, very unhappy because patients can't be seen. Doctors are losing money. They can't serve their patients. Third-party adjudication to insurance companies cannot be made. Life gets difficult. So each application could have a different RTO and RPO associated with it. And one of the things we do as part of our SQL health checks that I mentioned before is to analyze how is your SQL Server configured and compare that to what the stated RTOs and RPOs for the organization are. Is the SQL Server in a state aligned with those RPOs and RTOs, or do you need to reconsider your approach or communicate up the chain that we are not configured in a way that will support what we've decided as an organization is important to us? So as we look at a variety of approaches towards backing up SQL Server, backing up your databases, there are common approaches that we see on a regular basis. And one of them is using a native SQL Server backup. So when you purchase Microsoft SQL Server, they give you the ability to back up each database, including those databases that are part of SQL Server itself, called the system databases. You're using Microsoft SQL Server to, in normal Transact SQL Server, to write out backup files to a disk. That's called native SQL Server backups, right? We're using SQL Server, and SQL Server is aware that it's being used, records that it's being used to back up the databases. They get written out into a local disk or remote disk. And in 2022, you can even go to the cloud, if I remember correctly, directly. So you can back up to a secure location. You can even encrypt the data, compress the data as it's being backed up if you choose to do that. Some backup utilities like Veeam and some other things actually have a backup agent that can be used to back up SQL Server itself. And SQL Server can be aware of those backups depending on the agent and the brand, the manufacturer. It can be aware of those. And we've got a whole nother discussion for that that's available there. And you can go and kind of read through that. We're not really talking about either one of those approaches today. We're talking about that third option that we occasionally see from organizations, and that is virtual machine backup. So taking a snapshot of the SQL Server itself as it is right now and saving that off as a snapshot, a VM level snapshot, a virtual machine level snapshot as an approach to backing up your SQL Server. So let's talk through whether or not that approach will meet your needs. So typically, as we go through conversations with our clients, particularly after going through a SQL health check, we notice that they are using VMware snapshots to back up their SQL environment. Here's the line of discussion that we typically have with them. Let's talk through 8 questions, and these will get more progressive, right? If the answer to the second question is VMware snapshots doesn't meet your need, then at that point that answers your question. So if you can answer yes to all of these questions, then VMware snapshots may be a good approach for you. The first question, when you consider any approach to backing up SQL Server, is will this meet your recovery point objective? If you have a recovery point objective of 15 minutes, is your approach going to support that 15-minute recovery point objective? Can you, if you can only lose 15 minutes worth of data, will this approach support that? Can you recover to within 15 minutes of that disastrous event? And if the answer is no, or if the answer is no, then obviously you need to make some adjustments. So asking what the recovery point objective for each database on that SQL Server is will help you to determine whether or not VMware snapshots are a good approach. Because if you can lose up to a day's worth of data and you're taking snapshots at the VM level nightly, then perhaps that meets your recovery point objective, right? If you have to have if you can lose up to, say, 2 hours worth of data and you're taking snapshots every 2 hours, perfect. You're satisfying your requirements. However, if you can only lose 15 minutes worth of data and you're only taking snapshots on a nightly basis, you'll never be able to meet that RPO requirement. So some questions to ask there. Will this meet my recovery point objective? How much data can you lose? What is your RPO? And the better question, or the follow-on question, is do all the databases have the same RPO? And if they do, great. If not, you need to consider the one that has the shortest RPO, the least amount of data that can be lost. compare that to how often the snapshots are taken. So let's say you can afford, you're using, your organization is using a snapshot approach to backing up SQL Server, and you're doing it nightly, and you can lose up to 24 hours worth of data for every single database on that server. So far, so good. The next question is, can you live without all or nothing recovery? Which means the VMware snapshot is going to snapshot the entire VM in all 15 databases on that VM. It's going to record exactly that state at that point for all databases. And if you restore that VMware snapshot, you're going to restore the state of all 15 databases as it was at the point of the snapshot. So you're really looking at, since it's a recovery of the entire VM level image, you're going to recover all databases at that point in time. And if that's okay, VMware may be still a good option for you. VM level snapshots may be a good option for you. But if it's not, then you've got to make some, you've got to determine what you're going to do next. So let's say, for the sake of argument, most of us have, if we have multiple databases on a single instance of SQL Server, which is pretty common, can you restore all 15 at one point? No. Not all's lost, though. You may be able to still use VMware snapshots. And in this case, if we do want to take this approach, the next question to ask is, well, what if instead of replacing the existing VMware snapshot image with the one we have in place, with the one we've backed up, what if we restore it to a parallel VM? What if we take the snapshot that we took and not replace the production one, but we restore it over to a parallel system, a parallel location, so that we can just grab the one database that we need and move it over to the production system? That could be an option for you. Now, it'll create some complications for you, because you'll need to, that VM snapshot, once it's restored, will need to be on a different, will have the same server name, the same IP address, the same everything as the production server. So you're going to need to segment that off into a different area so you don't, create some naming issues. Then you'll need to, of course, back up the database and restore it on the production server, or maybe just query the database and pull out the data that you need. Say your user deleted a half dozen rows that they need. Maybe you'll need to query the database and transition it over to the production SQL Server. So there's still some work to be done, but maybe VMware could be an option for you. A VM level snapshot could be an option for you if that's the case, because you've been able to restore the SQL Server, the image, over to a secondary location, queried it, done the backup, pulled it over, and restored it into your production environment. Seems like a bit of work, but perhaps that could work for you. Assuming that process is going to meet your recovery time objective. So how long can that application be down? You have your 15 databases on your production server. One of them got corrupted, or one of them, the deleter dropped, a user deleted a table. Now you've got to restore that VM, segment it off, do the backup, copy the backup over, do the restore, and then put everything back the way it was. So if that process meets your RTOs, your recovery time objectives, perhaps that will work. Now, once you recover that VM snapshot, you're still going to need to do the basics that, you would want to do before any restoration of a database. And that is, you're going to want to make sure that, it is in good shape. So you're going to want to do an integrity check on it to make sure that the data, after it was created after it was spun back up as a VM snapshot, the data has not been corrupted along the way. So you're going to want to make sure that that's in place before doing everything else. So let's say that whole process, you're good with it, right? So now you've got a VM, your approach that you want to document is to restore that VM snapshot. You're going to restore it off to a parallel system. And in doing so, you're going to do a backup, do an integrity check, copy it over, and now you've documented that approach. Everything's good so far. The next question, the fifth question you need to ask is, are you okay with putting all of your databases in what's called simple recovery mode? So SQL Server has multiple recovery modes available. Simple recovery mode is one where SQL Server is going to manage the log file itself. SQL Server is going to be the one that determines when that log can be truncated. So SQL Server uses something called write-ahead logging. So when a change is submitted to SQL Server, hey, add this row. SQL Server, first thing it does is it writes the log file and says, hey, I'm about to add this new row. It writes the row, and then it says, hey, I'm done with writing that row, right? That way it helps SQL Server to maintain that acid test, right? So that if something happens, either that row is completely written or it's not written, it's going to be atomic and repeatable and durable and so forth. So SQL Server uses that approach, write-ahead logging. Hey, I'm about to delete these 10,000 rows, writes that to the log file, deletes those rows, and then writes to the log file, hey, I'm done. SQL Server can manage that log file for you. That's called simple recovery mode. You don't have to worry about cleaning it up or maintaining it or backing it up or anything else. It's going to grow it as needed. It's going to truncate the inside of it as needed, and so it can reuse some space without it growing unbounded as needed. The problem with that is if you allow SQL Server to do that, if you put it into simple recovery mode, it means that you're forfeiting some pretty key considerations or abilities going forward. You're no longer going to be able to do a point-in-time recovery from a database. So you're no longer going to be able to say, I know that my user accidentally dropped this table at 11:55 a.m. So I want to restore to 11:54 a.m. I want to take my most recent backup, play it forward, then take the most recent transaction log back up and play it forward until I get to 11:54 to the moment that person accidentally deleted something, right? So you're not going to be able to do that anymore if you move it into a simple recovery model. Well, no problem. We don't need to do that anyway, right? Okay. You're also not going to be able to put in some pretty key high availability solutions as well. So the log file is key to log shipping and availability groups. Those are some pretty high-end and cost-effective ways to provide some disaster recovery and some high availability. So in availability groups, you've got a couple of SQL servers that are being synchronized. There's a lot more to it than this, but essentially you can think of it in terms of you have your primary replica and you have some secondary replicas, one or more. The primary replica is the one that users are interacting with. And every time a change is made to that primary replica, the availability group ships that information off to the secondary replicas so that if anything happens to that primary, you can have it automatically fail over to a secondary. Your users never know the difference. You know that you get an email, I get an email, but the users never know that failover happened. And that could be for either a planned event like maintenance or for an unplanned event like, disruption to service for some reason. That availability group can take care of it depending on how you set it up. You lose that ability when you go into a simple recovery model. You also lose a very, very cost-effective way to have a secondary machine sitting over there ready to spin up if something happens. It's called log shipping. You've got a couple of SQL servers. The logs are backed up over here on the primary SQL server on a regular basis, shipped across to the secondary server. And that one's just in a standby mode, waiting in case something happens to the primary SQL server. Log shipping is a great tool for a number of things. You can use it for upgrades. You can use it for a very cost-effective approach towards disaster recovery. Now it takes some it's not instantaneous, and it takes some manual intervention to have it flip over to that secondary system, unlike with availability groups, but it's an option for you. And that option's taken away if you go to a simple recovery model. So if high availability and disaster recovery capabilities are important to your organization, simple recovery may not be a great option for you. And if that's the case, then you're going to have to manage your log files yourself, which really it seems a bit pointless if you're not using SQL Server as a backup tool for your databases. But let's say you're okay with simple recovery, no problems there. The next question you need to ask is, are you okay if you're not being alerted if a specific database isn't backed up, right? SQL Server monitoring tools, there are a bunch of them on the market. We use our own called SeroShield, but there are others out there. Redgate has a monitoring tool. SQL Sentry from SolarWinds is a good monitoring tool. Idera has one. There's a number of them out there that you can use to monitor and proactively be alerted if your SQL Server begins having some issues. We've worked with a lot of them, but one of the things that we'll do is it will alert you if a SQL Server backup job has failed, or you can configure an alert that says, "Hey, this SQL Server database has not been backed up more than within the last X number of days or hours or whatever's important to you." So you can create and look at some alerts in there. And in our daily health checks, we're looking in log files to see when's the last time the SQL Server was backed up. And if it's too long, we may need to take some action on that. If you're not using an approach to your backup that makes SQL Server aware of whether or not those backups are occurring, then those monitoring tools are not going to be able to alert you if a specific backup has failed or a specific backup hasn't occurred within the time frame you need it to. Now, your snapshotting tools may be able to do that, but you need to configure that to happen. You need to be alerted if those snapshotting tools do not run or do not complete successfully. Let's say you're okay with all of that. The next question I would have then is, are you okay not practicing your database restores? Because as I mentioned early on, backing up a database is good, but it's only good as a avenue to get your restored, or you get to a point of restoring a database when and if you need to, right? They're a means to an end. I used to shock students when I was teaching, SQL Server classes many, many years ago, 20 years ago, when I would say, backing up a database is not very important. It's the ability to restore that is important. You can back up a database all day long, but if you can't restore it, it's not going to help you at all. The best way to make sure that you can restore it is to regularly practice it, right? So make sure you understand when this database goes down and needs to be restored. You've practiced it. You've documented the approach. You know exactly a step-by-step approach. If you need to script some things out, you've scripted those out ahead of time. You know how long it's going to take, so that when you have an event that requires a recovery and you've got senior level decision makers breathing down your neck, how long are you going to be down? When can we be back? When can we be back online? You can give them a good estimate. Why? Because you've already scripted everything out. You've got the documentation. You've practiced it. You know that it takes exactly 17 minutes to restore because you did it last week. So you can tell them, hey, in 20 minutes, we'll be back up online. You know exactly what's going on. You know how to do it. With a VMware snapshot, it becomes a little more difficult. It is possible, but to recover one SQL Server database, you're going to have to go through that whole process I mentioned before. Restore it to a secondary location, spin it up in a secondary place, do the backup, do the integrity check on the backup, copy it across, and then do the restore. Practicing that becomes a little more intense than doing it just for a single SQL Server database. And the eighth question that we typically ask is, when you take your VMware snapshots, are you doing it at a time where there are a lot of users interacting with your SQL Server, or are you doing it only at night and you're in 9 to 5 job or 9 to 5 business? If you're doing it only at night and that meets your RTOs and RPOs, then and you don't have a lot of users on during the off hours, then that may be okay. But what we've seen is that frequently those VMware snapshots can cause a disk I/O freeze, can freeze the disk I/O subsystem for several seconds, up to 15 seconds or more, on occasion when those snapshots are being taken. If that's the case, then you can expect poor performance, applications locking up, other things, jobs, data transitioning from one system to another, ETL processes, all of those are going to freeze up and wait while the disk I/O processes are frozen due to those snapshots. And so if that experience is going to be subpar for your users, that's something that you need to consider when you're looking at VMware as a VMware snapshot as an approach towards your backing up of your SQL environment. So, in summary, the 8 questions that we typically ask when we learn that a client has been using VMware as an approach towards backing up the SQL estate, to summarize, is, hey, will this meet your recovery point objective? That's the first question you've got to ask, regardless of any approach. Will this support our RPOs or RTOs? Can you live with an all or nothing approach? Can you restore all databases, or do you need to just restore one? If you need to restore just one, can you restore to a parallel VM? Do you have the space, the network segmentation, all of that to get it out? Does that process meet your RPOs, or I'm sorry, your RPOs, RTOs, sorry. Are you okay with setting up databases in simple recovery mode? Do you want to be alerted when your backups aren't completing? And are you okay with not practicing your database restores and having it done ahead of time so you know how long it'll take? And will disk IO freezes affect your users? If you can answer all of those questions in a way that means that you're okay, then yes, VMware can be a great approach. Typically, however, we find that that's not the best approach for our clients. And so typically what we recommend is a different approach. We recommend going with a native SQL Server backup. So we configure jobs that run on a scheduled basis, typically nightly, so that they are backing up all the SQL Server databases on a regular basis. Now, typically what we recommend is do weekly backups of the system databases, the ones that SQL Server uses to manage itself, MSDB, master, and so forth. Now, do that on a weekly basis. Our default approach is and we tweak as needed, is to do a weekly full backup of each database, do either nightly differential backups, or maybe more often, depending on the size of the database and how much is changing, maybe we do differential backups every 6 hours, every 4 hours, something like that. But typically we start with nightly on the differentials. And then we do transaction log backups regularly, typically every 15 minutes, so that no client will lose more than 15 minutes worth of data should something disastrous happen. Once we do that, we're writing that information out to a database, writing that out to a disk. Then we recommend that they use Veeam or another tool to take those backups and copy them off for longer term archival and retention management, right? So maybe they're putting those using another tool, snapshotting tool or something else to back up those files. So we typically only keep a few weeks worth of data backups available through SQL Server, and anything longer than that can be retrieved out of the Veeam or other tool that you may be using. We also recommend performing test restores on a regular basis, making sure that you can indeed recover from a disaster, restore those databases, do an integrity check on those databases, and make sure that you know exactly the process and the documentation required to make you whole again, right? When we talk to technicians, other DBAs, we say you want to document all this and script it out now so that you can go on vacation without being interrupted, right? Because you don't want to be the only person who knows how to do that restore. And then, as I mentioned, you want to do the integrity check to make sure that on a regular basis, every time you do the restore, make sure that nothing's been corrupted in the process. So some questions we typically get either while working with clients or while doing a webinar or in-person event is, how often should I back up my database? How often should we back up each database? Well, the answer is going to depend, right? It's going to depend on how the use case and the pattern of usage for that database. If it's a data warehouse that's getting refreshed nightly, that's going to be a very different use case than a highly interactive application that is consuming information from a bunch of different sources, including applications, maybe some ETL processes and so forth. It's going to depend. So you've really got to go back to the business or the stakeholders and ask, how much data can you lose and how long can it be down before things get painful? Another question we frequently get is, well, wait a minute, I've got a DR site, right? Our primary site is in Nashville, Tennessee, and I've got a DR site, in Denver, Colorado. So I shouldn't have to do backups because I can always fail over to my DR site, right? Not necessarily. even if it is configured to where that would be a viable option, do you really want to do an entire site-wide failover just because somebody accidentally deleted a row on a table in one database? Now, it's an important row, and you've been told you got to get it back, but do you really want to try to do an entire site-wide failover or even an instance failover just for that purpose? So I would contend, yes, you do need to still do backups. Third question we frequently get, okay, you talked about high availability and disaster recovery. What's the difference? Those technologies can blur at times. Essentially, disaster recovery is exactly what it sounds like. Something bad has happened, and you want to be able to recover from that event. So malware has struck your SQL Server. Data corruption has crept into one of the databases. An entire site has gone down because it's been flooded by the hurricane. You've got an outage on your primary data center in Virginia. Can we recover from that? How do we recover from that? Frequently, disaster recovery requires some sort of manual intervention, not always, but most often it requires some sort of manual intervention and an acknowledgement, hey, we need to do something, take some sort of action. High availability, on the other hand, is really a slightly different approach. High availability is for those systems that really should not go down. Those systems that if they go down, workers are idled, the company's losing money, is painful. For those systems, we can configure essentially availability groups or some other technologies that allow you to have multiple instances of SQL Server or multiple systems available for SQL Server to run on, so that if there's a planned or unplanned event that takes that SQL Server or operating system down, it immediately flips over, or pretty close to immediately flips over, with very little, if no, interaction from humans to make that flip over. So, for example, we had a client not too long ago who had an availability group set up, right? So they had their primary node in one subnet and a secondary node in a different subnet. There's a listener that the clients connect to, and it routes it to the active node. So if the primary node goes down, the secondary node begins responding. In this case, they had them in two different subnets, so that when a disaster struck in their primary node, primary network, their key systems never knew the difference. The listener recognized that the primary node was non-responsive, automatically flipped it over to the secondary node in a different subnet, and the current systems continued to function. The users never noticed the difference. IT folks got an email, we got an email, but that primary node took some time to recover because it was a site-wide, subnet-wide outage that was needed to be recovered from. Yet that key applications that were critical to the organization continued running. That's what high availability can do for you. The approaches and technologies can blend. You can use a combination. You can use high availability in your disaster recovery scenarios. You can use disaster recovery tools as part of your high availability in some cases. So those technologies and the way you leverage them can blend a bit. But the key difference is what you expect from the solution. So I have some additional resources available here. Questions that we've answered, even some links, if I remember correctly, to some other tool, or Microsoft and so forth. How often should I back up my SQL Server? How often should I test it? How can you tell what's in a backup file that just says backup1.bak? What's in there? How can you tell? other scripts, how long is it going to take to restore this backup? We've got to restore a backup. All right, now it's churning away. How long before it's done? Is it 10%, 20%, 22% complete? How long can we expect that it's going to run? So things like that. These are available for you to take a look at. We have a lot of scripts available in our script library that we make freely available. So I'd encourage you to take a look at these. All right. Last thing I'm going to do is turn off my camera so that you can see the information there. I'd like to thank everybody for carving time out of your day to join us on this webinar. This is the first in our series this spring. Like I said at the beginning, there will be 3 more, one a month for the next 3 months. We'll make sure that you're aware of those. There'll be Eventbrite registrations, and then you'll be able to register for them as well. In the meantime, if you want some additional information about this topic or some other SQL Server related topics, happy to share that with you. Best place to go is our blog. That's there at the bottom, thecerogroup.com/blog. You can see a lot of good information there. You can also shoot us an email. You can go to the mailbox there, info@thecerogroup.com. Happy to discuss, set up a call with you, discovery call, or just chat through, any issues you may be having. My email address, as I mentioned at the beginning, is joew@thecerogroup.com. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you next time.